Welcome back, everybody, to Solidarity Fridays. Yeah, excited to be here, Joe. How you doing today?
Doing pretty wonderful. Beautiful July day here in Colorado. And I heard you're in the middle of a heat wave of sorts.
Hot and humid here on the East Coast.
Yeah, it's kind of intense. Hopefully you get some relief soon.
Yeah. I think it's supposed to storm this afternoon, so.
That usually helps, yeah. Cool. So some interesting news going on in the world. But I guess before we dig into that, let's perhaps talk about psychedelics today. What is it? Oh man, coffee's not kicking in yet. We're calling it Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. It's a really great program that we've put together over the course of years, and now with CEUs for some professions. So it's got a ton of pre-recorded material, and essentially we use our 8 weeks of live supported class time to break that information down. And you can ask questions and dig in further. Essentially, the intention is to give you a strong foundation in which you can use that to orient yourself in this whole kind of weird field of psychedelics as it develops. Some people are just doing ketamine work. Some people are doing clinical research. Other people are getting their properties ready to be able to do legal MDMA work or psilocybin work when that becomes available in your locale. So this course is to get you ready, give you an amazing foundation, and you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Class starts September 17. And happy to answer any questions you have about it. If you want to email us at psychedelicstodayemail@gmail.com. Cool. So before we get into some explicit psychedelic stuff, let's kind of talk about some stuff happening in the world.
Yeah.
In particular, United States, and more specifically, Portland, Oregon. You know, drug users and people interested in the psychedelic topic should be interested in politics, in that, you know, it's politicians that could put you in jail for life based on their policies they've pushed through. And, you know, are certain things being done in a constitutional fashion or not? Yeah. So the topic is that these unmarked cars are coming filled with federal agents and are scooping up and arresting some protesters. I don't totally know what's going on there. I know that Department of Homeland Security at times has acknowledged that it's their folks. And, you know, perhaps it's paramilitary groups from different organizations. And the president somewhat threatened to do this in other cities as well, like Chicago and elsewhere.
Chicago, yeah.
Yeah. Anything of particular note here, Kyle?
Man, I've just like watched some of those videos, and I watched this other video last night I found on Twitter, and I'm not too sure where this took place. Not too sure if this is in Portland or if this was earlier when a lot of the other protests were going on, but it was just horrific. A group of cops, there's somebody, like a protester, down in the middle of the street, and these cops just trampled and beat this guy with their batons. It was literally like, oh, here's like a piece of meat, and we're just gonna walk by it and just and beat this person, stepping on them, kicking him in the head. And then just watching these police officers, after like a dozen police officers went by and just hit this person, just like it was like nothing. And then 3 officers came over, picked him up, put him on the sidewalk, and then just like, you know, it looked like they were trying to put him in a car, and then they just left him there. And it was just like so horrific to watch and be like, this is what's going on in the world right now. Especially in the United States. Like, it's just really sickening to see that. And again, like, you know, I was reading some of the comments. I don't think people really knew where that video was coming from. So, you know, sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt. Maybe it was in Portland, maybe it wasn't. But just to kind of see that, I mean, it did seem like it was from recent events somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just pretty gross to watch. But yeah, just watching the stuff that was unfolding in Portland, you know, just kind of concerning, right? Really threatening our freedom of speech,
Mm-hmm.
and threatening being able to come together to speak out. It's, you know, and just thinking about the psychedelic world, like, you know, we're all kind of in this taboo, controversial field that, you know, we all have to remember these substances are still illegal. And, you know, we get to openly talk about it. being protected by freedom of speech. But
Right.
I think we
Which
are
is a
kind of-
constitutional protection.
Mhm. But I think, we are kind of in a risk category at times for profiling and this and that, right?
I assume I'm being watched all the time, and it's wears on you, especially as a somewhat public figure or explicitly public figure in the space. It's like, okay, they're definitely watching. And when I see constitutional rights kind of like thrashed elsewhere, I assume it's going to end up in a different realm. Like, look at the Patriot Act stuff. Like, whenever surveillance happens, with the intention of using it for a particular group, like, okay, let's stop people from using a dirty bomb in a major US city. Yeah, of course. Like, yeah, it sounds like a great argument, except historically, almost every time when they do this kind of spying, bad stuff happens. FBI's COINTELPRO programs that was potentially responsible for murdering people in the activist spaces, like, that stuff was declared unconstitutional and illegal, and the FBI had to stop. And now it looks like this stuff's happening again. COINTELPRO, counterintelligence programs, what that's short for. And yeah, like warrantless wiretapping, that's happening, I think, right now. Well, do they even have to? Because Facebook just hands them the keys, and you're not really promised any protection whatsoever on these platforms. It's creepy and worth considering carefully. Like, if they're breaking laws, constitutional things that are, the foundation of the laws that we have here, what does that mean for everywhere else? Like, you and I having this free speech here. Like, will we continue to have free speech? Fucking hope so.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I think lawyers will, thankfully we've got some lawyers on our side, and we're probably okay. But it doesn't mean that it can't get okay. And you're right. Like, this is illegal, and people seem to forget that it's illegal. Even if it's decriminalized in a locality, doesn't mean the feds can't come in and shut you down. And that's why they call me the party pooper. I was talking to somebody the other day. I'm like, you know what? I'm a real buzzkill at times, but it's like I'm seeing so many people put themselves at risk that I feel like they need to know. Like, I'm happy with taking risks, but I'm informed that I could lose years of my life to prison.
Informed risk taking, right?
Right.
Like, what are you willing to risk, and what type of actions are you willing to engage in for that?
Right. And it's, it's a scary thing to have to consider it, but it's something that it's responsible to consider it. If you've got family and friends, like, are you willing to give up your access to them or their access to you, for years and years? And it depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But yeah, back to this protest thing. Like, it's, police brutality is illegal. If you catch it on video, they should get charged, but they probably won't based on what we've seen so far. If you're detained, I think you need to get Mirandized by a normal police officer and not get locked up in some strange federal detention center that's unknown. Like, these people are, in some cases, getting disappeared a la China, which is not good. I don't know what will happen to them or what is happening to them. None of us do. And the state of Oregon actually sued the federal government recently over this because it appears to be illegal behavior by the federal government. So, yeah. Anything more before we jump over to this kind of hero?
I mean, it all kind of, I think is all together. But yeah, Christopher David. I don't know if anybody has seen that video.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Navy vet, 53 years old, and was just standing in front of, these agents, and this just not even flinching, getting hit by the batons. But
the most amazing thing to me, Kyle, was he's yelling, "Are you okay? Like, how are you okay with breaking your oath to protect the Constitution?" Yelling at these guys.
Well,
And
that was the whole reason why he went
it.
down there, right? Because he wanted to voice, his opinion that way, and being a Navy vet and being part of those services and going down and being able to speak about that. And I sometimes wonder about that. Like, I don't know what it's like to be on that side of being an agent like that. But, I brought this up in like another podcast that we were chatting about. It's just like, if you are in those positions, like, I wonder if those people are thinking about, you always hear people say, how do you sleep at night? are some of these people really struggling with the decisions that their higher ups are trying to make them execute on? And if you are in that position, what do you do? You know, do you just keep following commands because you need the job and you need the benefits and you need the career because you have a family to support? Or are you just kind of buying into whatever they're telling you and feeling enraged that there's these violent protesters in the street causing fires? And, so you're standing behind saying, this is a threat to America. We need to protect these people, or protect America from these quote unquote violent protesters. And so, maybe there is an emotional component there on that other side, thinking like, we need to come in and clamp down on this. But I don't know. What is it like to be in that position? And
right. You have to, you're getting orders, right? Mm-hmm. And in a military organization, you don't follow orders. You go to get court-martialed and get put in quite the jail, quite the prison. On the other hand, you can quit your job and walk away. Is that the most ethical thing? Like, I want to quick counterpoint like this, we're getting all of this rhetoric because this is kind of the world we live in. Just imagine the kind of rhetoric they're getting. Like a couple of years ago, I remember hearing some alt-right guy talk about Antifa, and I was like shocked at the way they were talking about them. It's like, this is the new Taliban. Like, it's kind of like in the early 1900s, late 1800s, how they talked about anarchists. Mm-hmm. It's like, these are the people that will make civilization and tradition fall. Family values will rot, and, marriage will mean nothing anymore. And the government gets your kids. It's like the dystopia scenario for the people on the right is like kind of Stalinist Russia. And that's like their fear, is like everything looks like that. And, is that valid or not? I don't know, but that's real for them. Like they're literally embodying it. A lot of them, not everybody.
Totally.
So yeah. And it's something to be aware of. Like, what are they getting exposed to? Even if you disagree seriously, it's worth knowing. Mm-hmm. But like the fundamental issue here, like, what is the Constitution? To what degree do we need to protect it? To what degree are federal agents who are sworn oath to protect it? Like, what's their responsibility and what are the ethics there? If you're doing really bad shit to children, like the ICE thing from a bunch of months ago is not over yet. Like, there's still plenty of people locked up in detention centers for immigration violations and whatnot. And it's really fucking ugly. It's really gross. So that's still happening. Now this other stuff's happening. And you've got so the fucked up thing is, for a lot of people, is it comes down to finances. Like, do I want my retirement that I worked this hard for to stay in the federal government, or do I want to walk away? Mm-hmm. And that's a really tough incentive structure to face. Like, okay, like, you didn't make all the right decisions. Your 401k is not that well filled up, but you've got this federal pension that if you last 20, 30 years, like, cool, you get it. So it's like, stay in line, stay in your lane. Otherwise you lose all that, even if it means doing some really nasty, gross shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what they're up against personally. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember a few years ago, it was when I was living in Burlington. I remember there was a protest about like police brutality, or just, I remember it was really being targeted at police. And actually a lot of the cops that used to come into the deli were really nice. And I got to know a bunch of them. And I remember this one police officer, woman, came in and she was like, man, I really just don't want to be out there tonight. She's like, I really just want to be home. She's like, people are going to be so pissed. And then just that, listening to her express her concerns as a human being, showing up to a job and saying like, I got to like get in riot gear. She's like, I'm sure these people are very peaceful, but there's a lot of anger right now. So it's like, so now you're thinking about this transference and countertransference of the police being scared that even though you have peaceful protesters, that somebody's going to be an instigator and agitate and, maybe provoke some sort of violence. And, this woman is just like, I don't want to go out there right now. Like, I'd rather be sitting at home drinking a beer in my garden, but this is like what I have to do. She's like, I'm actually really scared going out there right now. And, I was listening to her just say this, and that was the first time, like, I had to sit there and be like, wow, yeah, what is it like to be on that side? Because, I'm on the other side, like, fuck that, like, fuck, police brutality, fuck, da, da, da. And then just hearing, the concern of this person who's just in this position of power, actually not really wanting to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really eye-opening to some extent.
It's tough. And a lot of these people didn't get into law enforcement to do the bad stuff that they ended up doing. There's plenty of minority police officers that got in there to protect their communities from the people they thought were to blame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't,
Well,
how do we humanize that? But how do we also think critically about it at the same time?
Totally. Right. I mean, you get in that, you don't feel good about that. Do you sit there and, think about your own integrity, ethics, and morals and say, well, I'm not going to participate? And I think this, we were engaging in a conversation the other day, and I brought up this topic of this top-down approach to change versus maybe like a bottom-up approach. And how many people get into, higher systems, institutions with really good intentions to wanting to make change and thinking about like, oh, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to change the system from the inside out, and thinking I'm going to change it from the top down. And how many times do people get in those positions and they're either kind of like pushed around, they get involved with all the politics involved, and then they realize maybe they don't have all that power to make the change because they're battling up against like so many different systems. And what would maybe like a bottom up approach be? And how could we give power back to communities to start to create their own change instead of thinking that we need to change it from these hierarchical systems? And I always come back to like Bucky Fuller's quote about, just creating a different system. You don't change the system by trying to change it. You make a new system that's obsolete to that old way of being. And so that's something that I've been thinking about in the past like few days from an article I was reading, just this idea of like this top down. And, I'm thinking also too, from like the somatic lens of in therapy, approaching it more cognitively, intellectually, this whole top-down brain approach versus like a body-oriented approach, and working with the trauma, working with the body and thinking about, okay, well, what's the body? It's people, it's communities, and how do we start to work that way? But I mean, again, most people get into those positions because institutions have created all these kind of gates, and you get in there so you can get the money, you can get the authority. And if you go create that other system outside of it to try to create something new, maybe you don't get the money. It's a lot more work. You don't get the benefits maybe that you would get from these institutions that have been around for a very long time. But yeah, I don't know. Philosophical dilemmas.
I like this idea of both hand.
Yeah.
Like the Aldous Huxley approach being top down and the Tim Leary approach being bottom up. If we want to look at the psychedelic revolution from the early days perspective. And I like your analogy there of mind meets body. Like how do we kind of start with a little bit of both, right? Like there does need to be a little bit of theory if you're doing somatic work.
Totally.
Yeah. And I think it's really valuable to think about it both ways. Like, how do you give yourself more autonomy and more freedom? Or perhaps, get what you need. How are you going to get what you need? And then also like pushing from the top to get what you need.
Yeah.
Get the protection you need.
Yeah, I think it's an integrative approach, right? It's not but I think typically the way that we think is more of a top-down approach. And I don't know. So I don't know, it just got me thinking. It's like, how could we have more an integrative approach where we incorporate some of these bottom-up approaches into our way of thinking of changing systems and making change overall?
Yeah. A thing I've been thinking about recently is this Ken Wilbur framework of like transcend and include. How do we transcend the old thing, but include all the lessons from that thing? So like, I don't really know how that relates here directly, but it's more about like an evolution of knowledge. Like I keep using it in terms of like psychology, the field of psychology generally.
Right.
Like how do we include everything but behaviorism, but transcend behaviorism as the only way of understanding psyche? Which is not exactly true, but it's very dominant in psychology. Yeah. How do we kind of make the human psyche more magical, the human more of a valuable thing in itself, as opposed to a working unit in a
Yeah.
cog, you know?
I think it's like maybe understanding like context of
Mhm.
where some of these things fit in. So just thinking about like behavioralism and then thinking more about like depth psychology, for example.
Mm.
When I talk about integration, I talk about that idea of GPA, grounding or get grounded, process, and then action. And that's not, it can be linear working with that way, or it doesn't have to be linear. But just thinking about like, if you were just focused on that one, like, oh, like, you're trying to integrate. So you just need to focus on grounding, right? And then you just kind of focus on that and never really take any action. Or I don't know if a lot of people are like me, very analytical, and you can just process things to death. What is that? Paralysis by analysis, and you just
Yeah.
keep processing, right? And where do you make that decision to take action, which is a behavior change sometimes, right? So you need these both ends, right? Like you need to be able to incorporate everything. It's not just saying behavioralism's bad. I mean, it works, and we need some of that to actually
Right.
make some sort of behavior change, but it's not getting caught up on these extremes. It's like, how do we find, I mean, even just thinking about like institutions, right? I mean, we've talked about institutions such as the FDA. I mean, really great to some extent when there's a lot of different medications and drugs just being out there, not being tested, and issues coming up. We've talked about this on a previous Friday episode of the counseling field and higher ed and the coaching field. And regulation can sometimes be very important. And then other times it's very limiting and it can be very gatekeeping at times. And so I don't know, how do you find balance between all this and figure out what works and, what's not working? And I don't know, take more of a holistic, integrative approach to systems instead of just saying this is the one system of how it works. And which I guess kind of comes back to, I'm thinking like systems theory and process, like
Mhm.
how do all these different things actually create wholeness, and how do we, I don't know, I guess like find value in all of it to some extent and figure out how they can really operate harmoniously. It's hard. I don't know the
Mhm.
answer there, but
hmm Yeah, it's big. Yeah, like I always say behaviorism because it's an easy example, right? It's like low hanging fruit in the critique. It's like what is psychology? It's this, science, supposedly the scientific study of psyche, or like what is it, and how to manipulate it, how to heal it, and MKUltra was part of psychology, so how to harm it and how to really manipulate the hell out of it. Like it doesn't have to be altruistic to be part of that field. So it's a really vast field. And A. Maslow and Stan Groff are part of psychology. So how do we include things from the birth and things that are transpersonal? So it's, just expanding the scope till we find that it's complete. We're not there yet. Like we're kind of at the end of the line with physics, it seems like to me. This is kind of what Lenny and I were talking about yesterday after you dropped off. It's like, there's no real great new philosophers. It's all just kind of like details and technical work. Like science is still making a lot of great developments, but almost everything you see is engineering. So it's application of the science. Right. So, it would be really great to get these new breakthroughs, but it takes a long time for them to trickle down. So we need these things now in psychology so that we, 20 years downstream when it's more included, we have a better understanding and application of psychology, I guess, in the university and clinical settings and beyond, and families too.
Tricky stuff to sift through.
Right. Now, like circling back to Christopher David, like that kind of courage doesn't come easily to folks. Like,
No.
what is that allowed him to be able to just get beaten?
Not
Gandhi.
flinch. Yeah.
Yeah, not flinch at all. He was getting hit really hard. It wasn't
Yeah.
until he got sprayed in the face with mace that he slowly turned around and slowly walked away, which is killer. Like really, really awesome to see that. Like Gandhi used to train people. Like he found it really easy to train really tough military retirees in this. Not easy, but found out they were great candidates because they had been through plenty of physical pain already. Like, okay, it's just another thing, but it's for this fight that is righteous, theoretically. And yeah, how do you get that? How, like, do psychedelics help produce those? I don't know. I kind of don't think so. Could they? Maybe, in the right container.
Right.
Should they? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to say yes or no to that one. But yeah, we need this kind of like strong soul power to kind of ride us through this thing. And that's kind of what they called it. I think was soul power, but they had a special Hindi name, I think, for it. I like to draw these analogies.
Mm-hmm.
To bring back up this food safety, drug safety thing you're talking about, FDA, like I'm working through a lecture series on the history of bourbon by this really, really clever, enjoyable professor. And he talked about how Upton Sinclair's The Jungle kind of forced food safety laws into place.
Right. Yeah.
He wanted to really complain about workers' rights, but they picked up on the food safety and quality issues. And, can I trust that what I'm buying is really what I was promised or what I was told? And for a long period of time, you couldn't. This is the same way in the booze industry, the drug industry, and the food industry. And I think even Teddy Roosevelt got poisoned by some canned food on one of his colonial adventures. And these things contributed to food safety. And then we had the thalidomide thing that kind of triggered the FDA and drug testing. And this is a topic that I didn't really prepare you to talk about, but decriminalization, decriminalization is excellent. Like, it's a really good next step for where we're at, in my opinion. But because of food safety issues, drug safety issues, and just, safety issues in general, like, I don't know that we're going to be in a perfect situation until we have groups that can legally test it and legally sell it.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a big fan of black markets for a long time, of all kinds. And I even study Russian black markets. But maybe you get something that approximates what you wanted, but it might not be. Like, if you look at black market benzodiazepines, for instance, like, people will make, like, apparently it's the most expensive to sell pure Xanax and pressed bars. But if you make a blend of these things, you can approximate what the feeling might be and sell it for the same price, if not more.
Right.
Even though you were told it was Xanax and it's not, and this is a big issue for people with drug dependencies on those things. Like, are you going to get the drug you need to keep you out of these dangerous, detoxes? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Hopefully. So this is kind of like just speaking to the legalization thing versus decrim. Like, I love to trust people, but people over the long term have not been trustworthy. Like, how many people sell 2,5-IN bomb as LSD, or used to?
Right.
How many people died? Like, a bunch. And, this, you bring up in class quite regularly, the Albert Hoffman blotter with fentanyl on it.
Carfentanil, I think it was.
Carfentanil, which is even more potent. So, these are the reasons why I lean towards regulation. Like, I think mushrooms regulated as a regular food product would be totally fine. Like, if it's not cooked and it looks like mushrooms, great. But, are you adding shit to it? Like, are you soaking them in like a caffeine solution or an amphetamine solution just so people feel more? Like, I don't know. Like, is that a bad thing? I don't know. Like, unless you're advertising it as pure mushrooms, no, I don't think so. Like,
I think where legalization gets tricky for a lot of people is the control. But I mean, like, I think ideally,
like, who's going to buy it and who's going to sell it and produce it?
Yeah, I mean, for example, like what was happening, I think it was Ohio a few years ago, where they created a bill around
all the rich people were going to own the whole thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like, I would love to see it legalized where, especially for the semi-synthetics and synthetics, where, like, you could possibly go get pure LSD without having to try to buy it on the street and not know what the hell you just got.
Or the dose.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's huge. Imagine you knowing how much you can actually take so you can, figure out dosing regimens and whatnot. But, like, for maybe the natural things, like kind of what a lot of states do, like Colorado, like, you have the option to go purchase cannabis in a regulated market, but you can also grow it. Like, here in New Jersey, like, I know that they're not writing a bill, or it's not in the bill that you can grow your own. And it's like, that's shitty, I think. Like, I think you should be able to grow your own if it's something that you can grow, or even mushrooms, right? So how could you have those laws where it's more natural, where you could grow it? Like, oh, I got like some, thinking about food, right? You could have a psychoactive garden if you really wanted to. Shit, I
That's
got
the
morning
dream.
glories. Yeah, I got morning glories outside, and it's like most people aren't using that recreationally, but I mean, it's a thing. So I
Yeah.
think like that's where people get a little concerned about legalization, right? Like the medical model kind of dominating and only being able to get it through that. But
Black
I don't know.
markets never go away, right?
Yeah.
It's, they persist in lots of places, even where, like North Korea, methamphetamines are super popular. You get caught, it's a death sentence, I think. So, and there's other countries where drug offenses are death sentences. Thanks, Nixon. But yeah, like once things are legal, like I just prefer to see like government funds spent on stuff like the Green New Deal to save us from climate change, or healthcare for all, like those kinds of things. Why spend to put people in jail when we could have, like, just like with cannabis, taxable revenue? Like, I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like,
right.
Just because it's not equitable, like, I don't think that totally excludes the thing. Like, I would just like to see less people going to jail, less people being harmed by black market drugs, and more clean, appropriate drugs available. It's it's a complicated thing, and I feel it. It's just not appropriate that people are going to jail and people are dying from going to jail, and also from bad drugs. Like that girl that died at lightning in a bottle not that long ago. Like that's really tragic and really fucked up. And ecstasy, like people are eating huge ecstasy pills and dying at times. I think that was in the UK a year or two ago. A 16-year-old had too much, or maybe even younger than that. And by having a legal regulated market, no fear whatsoever from state, local, or federal governments, like you can proceed. And, it might not be as pretty and as utopian as you want, but like utopia is just that. It's nothing. It's no place. It's like, I would love to have a utopia, but life is kind of struggle. Life is fighting against these forces that, I don't know, we're interacting with all the time. Yeah. So I'm probably visioning something that's probably won't happen for 50 years, but I want to pretend it happens 2 years out, just so I can feel like there's a real serious hope.
There's hope. Yeah.
Yeah. And, perhaps it happens. Like if the federal government goes broke and can't enforce prohibition anymore, which really could happen given how much the printing presses are rolling. Like, yeah, perhaps the DEA, ATF need to go away.
That's something that like has come up even just amidst like the coronavirus. Like
I keep buying Bitcoin.
Nice. Like, where is the money going? It's like, how do we have the money to like just send these paramilitary agents in, but you didn't have the money to like produce, personal protection equipment for hospitals and stuff like that. And it's like, dude, what's going on here? Like, why do we have so much money for military spending and policing when like, why aren't we putting that towards healthcare and stuff like that? It's mind blowing. Where it's like, it doesn't sound like Trump even thinks twice. Like, all right, this is happening in Portland, and we're just going to send in these agents to clean it up. And it's like, what's going on with coronavirus still, right? Like, there's. Can we get hand sanitizers? Can we get all the personal equipment? Can we like put funds to getting production in line? What happens if a second wave comes? Are we even thinking about that? Or are you just kind of thinking about like I don't know. It kind of.
So I want to kind of point out this, like a lot of personal finance people will say like, oh, you don't know what's important to you? Give me 20 minutes with your finances and I'll show you, right? What your priorities are. And a thing I like to look at is, what is the federal budget? Where is the money going? And you'll see this kind of like split all over the place. But, theoretically, only 3.2% of GDP, or $676 billion, is spent on defense. And, what's spent on Medicaid and Medicare? Like 4.9%. So 409 billion for Medicaid and 644 billion for Medicare. Like, and we're outspending, like regarding defense, we're outspending Russia, China, like 20-1, I think, maybe more. So like if they are the only logical threat, like why? Well, it's really not the only logical threat, right? There's these kind of more guerrilla-oriented groups that are also quite expensive to deal with. And then there's all sorts of shadow budget stuff, like that's not even really documented in here, like the cocaine trade to fund operations at the CIA. Like that's pretty serious. That's a lot of money. So, there's just, where are the priorities and like, do they need to be manipulated? I think, yes, they do. Like we need to spend a lot more. Like the bigger threat is not China and Russia, it's climate, because that's a global issue.
Right. It's going to impact everybody.
Right. And pandemics will be coming because we can't spend as much on healthcare, and like CDC, WHO, like we just dropped from WHO. You saw that one, right?
Yeah.
That's tragic, I think. Like the WHO will still exist and do well, I hope, but other countries are going to have to kind of pump up their spending a little bit there. Yeah, it's tough. I don't really know how to address all this stuff, but as the printing presses keep going to keep the government floating and keep people somewhat happy, what happens to the US dollar and what happens when the US dollar kind of collapses a little bit. Hopefully it won't collapse because it's still a really important currency worldwide. But what if it did? Food would get more expensive, which some people are already not eating in this country. Yep. And medicine becomes more expensive and you can't get access to the stuff you need. So like, yes, it would be great if we could fund all this stuff, but we've got to make cuts. We've got to maybe bump our taxation a whole bunch. Like interest rates are as low as they've ever been, I think, in the last few hundred years. I think I heard of stuff like above 40% interest on mortgages way back, maybe even higher at times. So it's like,
wow,
what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And is it worth doing? And should be shifted around? I think so. I don't know how exactly, but we really need to prioritize
big questions.
Like what China's doing is looking hundreds of years into the future. What we're doing is looking, to the next election. I'm a big fan of long-term thinking. Nothing's really
what's China been doing, thinking?
So they've got this project going that's related to John Cobb and process philosophy around becoming, what was it called? Something along the lines of Project for an Ecological Civilization. So they're teaching process philosophy and ecology everywhere. They're doing
Is that all throughout China, or is this just specific?
This is a central government thing. Like, and there's what I think over 30 universities or colleges built to study process thought, process thinking, and ecological civilization. And when I was down at the conference in Claremont at Pomona for process philosophy, there was like 3/4 of the people there were delegates from China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really interesting. There's, probably some interesting Chinese propaganda happening, but, as at the same time, we're talking about psychedelics and weird stuff and human potential. Like they're talking a lot about climate engineering. How do we make better cities that, are more sustainable? How does China survive? And they're thinking about it. And they're still a developing nation with a lot of people without running water and good food. Like, yes, they might be one of the richest, biggest countries in the world, but it's still not perfect there. It's still far from perfect there. I think they even have concentration camps. I think there's a ton of Muslim people in concentration camps in China. And I think they were largely dehomed to put in this very extreme highway across China to try to connect to Europe. So easier trade over land. It might have been train tracks, might have been a highway. I forget exactly what. But, global issues, they're really a big deal. And they impact us as people interested in the psychedelic world. And I think we've said it before, but there's going to be a lot of people without homes in 10, 20 years from climate disaster. And there's going to be a lot of trauma. There's going to be a lot of need for this work.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I think it's incredibly important that we're doing this project and other people are really getting the skills they need to play a part. Mushrooms, they're cheap enough, easy enough to grow in a closet, and they can grow all over the world in a closet. So, talk about a cheap, powerful, and portable therapy.
Yeah.
And if we find out a skillful way to do 5-MeO DMT therapy smoked, like, I'm not saying we have that yet. I'm saying there's a possibility. Like, that really makes it affordable and scalable. And the chemistry there is pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just even thinking outside of like mental health, and I know this is something Lenny has always emphasized, and we emphasize too at times, but just the creativity potential here. And I think battling up against climate change, needing to think about new systems, new ways of being, new ways of living. Like, I think we need a lot of creativity and a lot of outside the box thinking at times. And so what type of role will psychedelics play in that mental health and trying to maybe figure out new ways of living if, the climate continues the way it's going?
Mm-hmm. So it's probably enough about that kind of dark stuff, but, keep in mind, there's things that we need to address. There's scary stuff going on, and that's a big driver for us here. So the opportunity I'm seeing, one opportunity right now that we've discussed a few times, Kyle, I don't know that we talked about it on the show, but telehealth with ketamine. So actually doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy remotely, perhaps even leveraging groups.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've had some conversations with Raquel Bennett about this.
So, yeah, Dr. Raquel Bennett was supposed to come on a couple months ago, and then things got delayed. And
that's right.
We were supposed to record, I think, last week, and something came up. So this is a conversation that's been brewing on our side. It just hasn't really took root just because of scheduling and everything else that's going on. But I don't know, like, it's going to be interesting to finally catch up with Raquel and see how her thinking has changed about telehealth and ketamine, and just thinking about like maybe where she's at now that we're, months into the corona pandemic. And, I know some people are going back into the office offering this. And when the pandemic first hit, she put out a statement at Korea Institute about, if you are doing this work, like, make sure you are doing telehealth for the safety of, the therapist and the client. So it's interesting, right? So there's been a bunch of different clinics and organizations that have been offering telehealth ketamine services. I know Mindbloom had huge PR around it in the beginning. I know Polaris Insight Center also offers it. Field Trip, I believe, is starting to offer it. And there's a bunch of other, clinics out there and practitioners that are doing that. And then on the other side, there's people that are continuing to work in person, really reflecting on their own sense of safety, and if they feel safe enough to do that. So I don't know. It's a really interesting thing. And, I've had different conversations with Raquel and other practitioners just to try to get an understanding of how people are approaching this. And on one side, some prescribers and practitioners feel real uneasy about prescribing ketamine to clients, especially new clients that they might have a rapport with, and doing at-home use. Remember when I was chatting with Raquel, and I think she even said this on our class when she chimed in as a guest, that it's totally legal to prescribe that if you are, meeting that diagnostic criteria, right? And there shouldn't be too much fear around prescribing that as medication. But, I guess the fear is the client going to abuse it? How are they going to use this outside of, a more contained setting, say in a therapy room with a professional? And I mean, these are a lot of questions to explore moving forward with this. And, I think there's probably going to be some clash of opinions on how to really approach this. But and I think that's good, right? Because this is how we evolve and develop over time, and maybe figure out new ways. And so, for example, like when I think about online ketamine therapy, I mean, my initial reaction, or really any online psychedelic therapy, I'm thinking, how can you really be there for the person, right? Like, that seems really risky. On the flip side, my way of thinking, and I guess it gets a little bit trickier if you're a prescriber and you're prescribing this medication to somebody versus somebody that just gets a substance on the black market, right? So there's not that level of responsibility there.
Let's talk about the risk real quick though before you do the positive. So like
Okay.
why risky? Like my first thing is mania, like something
hmm
really scary happens and re-traumatizes somebody. Those are the two major ones, perhaps getting cut and getting injured at home when no one's there to help you.
hmm
What other things are kind of factors here?
Yeah, so I guess if we're just thinking about ketamine in general, I mean, yeah, just the level. Has this person ever had an experience with a non-ordinary state before? What type of dose are they taking? Is it going to completely knock them out? Is that going to be kind of terrifying for the person? Are they taking like a low dose where they feel a little bit, I guess, like intoxicated and they decide to get up, they fall over, something like that happens? You definitely get a little wobbly with ketamine, and not always really there. So yeah, the physical safety and the psychological safety. I had a friend that had a prescription for it, and the practitioner just said, yeah, you can go home and just do this. And this person was a recovering alcoholic. I forget, but she was really concerned. She's like, I am just going to go home and take this by myself. Like, I don't know, how it's really going to feel. Like, do I need somebody there with me? And kept asking me all these questions. And this was like years ago, where like I didn't realize that some prescribers were doing that at the point. So I was like, whoa, that sounds a little little ahead of things. But yeah, and so does the client have any sort of experience with this? And can they keep themselves safe? I think is the biggest risk factor there. Like, what if they find themselves in a state of they're doing some sort of trauma processing, and they're not really good at that double bookkeeping, and it really traumatizes them.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So there are risks here. I think, let's say you're the facilitator, you're the prescriber. This is not illegal. This is an open legal possibility. It's just a matter of, do you think you can contain this appropriately, skillfully enough so that they get benefit and the risk is low enough? Like, people do risky procedures all the time. Just imagine how many scary surgeries are done all the time.
hmm
Like,
And I guess to even clarify, like, when we're talking about this, is it just at home use, or is this with psychotherapy versus in Zoom,
mhm.
right? At least like if you're on Zoom, you have some communication, you're able to chat through that. But, if they don't have that, I think those risks get a little bit more elevated, increase a little bit.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and typically this is lozenges.
Yeah.
People aren't
Yeah.
injecting themselves at home,
Yeah.
which would be ridiculous. But, just consider that it's an option. And now so we covered all the risks. Let's talk about some of the benefits of telehealth, ketamine
hmm
assisted psychotherapy.
Yeah. I mean, something I was thinking, like you just saying lozenges, and I'm thinking about like low dose lozenges. I mean, I'm sure there's people that use cannabis at home, right? And
No.
can really find themselves in a really deep state. I mean, we
Oh,
chatted about
Jesus.
this,
Yeah.
like edibles, right? And
Horrifying.
like
Even smoked. I've been in
smoked,
really
yeah.
horrifying scenarios.
Yeah. So, thinking about like what's the difference there at times? I mean, obviously a different substance, but people can still find themselves in very difficult psychological states with these substances. And yeah, I feel like I've definitely had some pretty terrifying cannabis
Hmm.
experiences in the past where I was like, well, I was able to navigate that by myself. Maybe it would have been nice to have somebody there. But, on the flip side, when I'm thinking about doing some of this work, like, thinking about cannabis, where it's like, I sometimes like to do work alone. I like to just like close my room, do a bunch of somatic stuff by myself, and really have agency over that whole experience. But on the other side, like being in relationship and being able to process on that deeper level, and I think that's the difference is like that self exploration type of healing versus like trying to do therapy and thinking about the relationship and how the relationship factors into the healing. So yeah, on the positive, I'm thinking about if people are engaging this. I mean, thinking about like harm reduction, right? So people could be doing this already at home to some extent. Black market, they're reading about the studies, and they're trapped at home and not having much social connection. And I mean, what's the benefit of just being there as a sitter? And to us, I guess it elevates the maybe liability that you're engaging in this, and thinking about like, oh, like if something goes wrong, then I'm liable. But also from a harm reduction point of view, it's like if this person is going to do it to some extent, anyways, wouldn't it actually be safer to have somebody there with you that's trained? you know,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think like just even thinking about that could be really beneficial from the harm reduction lens. Yeah, and I mean the benefit thinking right now during pandemic is not having to go into an office, not being possibly exposed. I was just on a therapy forum, and somebody, I don't know how most people are operating, but that are therapists that are listening. But here in New Jersey, this is specifically for New Jersey, there's a lot of therapists that are like, I'm not going back into the office until it feels completely safe. There's a few people that were on the thread saying, like, I'm doing like 1 or 2 sessions a day in the office. The rest is all telehealth. Some people hate telehealth. It's like the learning curve. You feel like you don't get the same, emotional connection through online. You miss a lot of some of those nonverbals that you would pick up on the room, and just the energy is a little bit different, right? But access right now, there's so many people that just don't feel safe going out, right? And it's like we have to balance this, I think, risk benefit, do a risk benefit analysis, and thinking there's people that are suffering, people that are struggling with mental health issues. I mean, I've even noticed myself so many ups and downs in the past few months, right? And it's just like sitting in the uncertainty. Sometimes you just feel like, what the hell is going on? Like when does it feel safe to make big decisions? And it feels like a BPM too at times, where you're just kind of in this womb, and and it's just everything's closing in on you. And to be able to have access to do this type of work, I think is really important during these times. Like, how much better would you feel if you were able to carve out some of that time to be able to engage in some of this deep inner work, to maybe shed some of the fear and stress that might be going on in your life? I guess going back to the cons, just thinking about everything that we've had conversation with in the past about doing psychedelics during a pandemic and time of crisis, thinking about the collective unconscious and thinking about some of the stuff that might emerge. But I think like with ketamine and some of the other stuff, yeah, maybe it doesn't really entail all that at times. I mean, I guess it really depends on the psyche and what a person's processing. Yeah.
Now, how about concerns? So a psychiatrist that's been interested in this ketamine assisted psychotherapy work. What kind of concerns has that psychiatrist been kind of airing to you about kind of getting started and in this time?
I think some of it was just around not being able to do it in office.
Mm-hmm.
So really, and that makes sense, having new clients and not really sure on how you want to be able to prescribe that medication to somebody if you don't have a rapport with them, and just the idea of being able to prescribe it to somebody. But I think there's ways around that, like prescribing 1 lozenge at a low dose and doing a test round, to be able to like maybe titrate that experience over time, or just even thinking about, the therapy aspect in general. How do you really just focus on therapy and then use ketamine as a tool to enhance therapy? That's something that I've chatted with Lauren Taus about in upcoming episode about, we think of psychedelic assisted therapy thinking like the magic is in the medicine. And I think when some people want to do this work, they're really focused on the medicine and the experience. not downplaying it. We all know the benefit and the power of that, but also what is the power of trying to establish good rapport over time. And I know that also gets into access because then you have to pay for all these sessions over time. And yeah, so that's a whole other kind of dilemma there. But yeah, I think it just around wanting to feel safe in person.
Mm, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like if the safety's not there, the therapeutic alliance might not be up to snuff, and it just might not be up to that person's quality standards. Just a big
Yeah.
thing to consider, right? It said like like I want to kind of be more on the side of, person to person, like in face to face therapies, but we're in a kind of a tough time right now where people are really hurting. Like I've been contacted by countless people who just can't get access to what they need right now, like basic healthcare even, and basic mental health care too. So like telehealth is there, and I do want to say like that heart connection can happen through telehealth. Like you can get really strong rapport with people remotely. Just might be a little longer than you might expect, maybe.
Yeah. And, I've also chatted with people that have been doing this in person too, right? So they're taking safety precautions, using masks, trying to stay 6 feet apart from, the client, different safety protocols of sanitizing doorknobs and everything, opening windows to get ventilation. And so, if you're at that level of, and I think that really comes down to the level of comfort for the therapist and the client, right? Are you both feeling comfortable and safe to do that in person? And I think that's something that, you as a therapist, if you are a therapist trying to maybe get involved in this work, to consider, right? I know for me, like trying to do any in-person work at this moment, just kind of, I still feel really nervous about it. And I'm trying to take a lot of precautions about it because I don't have a spleen, and being a little immunocompromised and just thinking about safety. And sometimes I'm like, oh, is that irrational? Like, just thinking about like, oh, like maybe I should, or, and I don't even know how many people are doing in-person sessions of therapy, like I said, here in New Jersey right now. But yeah, I mean, it's something on my mind where I'm like, oh, is like, do I want to be doing that in person right now? For me, it feels really comfortable just trying to do a lot of online work. And that's my level of comfort. I'm trying not to get exposed. I don't, it's the last thing that I want to happen.
Right. I've had it. It's horrible. Like I haven't been tested to confirm it, but it is not a fun disease. And it's really worth skipping if you can make it happen. And yeah, like if you as the therapist doesn't feel safe while doing therapy, what does that mean? Like, are they going to pick up on those vibes? Probably. So, feel safe. Like I feel really bad for a lot of these teachers who have to go back and teach little kids. So
yeah.
They'll lose their job if they don't go back, but they're like, it's not safe. So what do you do? Yeah. So I guess like I want to say, I think there's ways to do telehealth psychedelic work, but I think it's risky. I think I steer people away from it for the same reason I steer people away from online breath work. Like there's just factors that can happen, like come up and potentially put the person in great harm. So yeah, I don't really have too much more than that.
Yeah. I mean, I've chatted with people that have done online sessions and they've really enjoyed it, and felt really safe. But this was somebody that has had experience in the past. Again, thinking about new clients that may not have experience, what does that look like? But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's really interesting to watch evolve over time, and just to see how people are being creative and being able to offer that support. And I mean, for the most part, it sounds like some people are really enjoying it and they're doing it really well. Like I was just on Polaris, and they're offering online groups and individual online sessions and all sorts of stuff. So
right, it's a brave new world in a lot of ways, and I guess just be careful. do what you think is best for you and your clients. And yeah, that's it. Be in integrity. Don't do it just for the money, just because you can. It's got to be good for them and good for you and safe enough. So anything else we want to throw in, Kyle, before we wrap here?
No, I know we had on the list about breath work online too, because that's something, but I know we're at time. And
yeah, let's try to dig into that more next time.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you all for tuning in. It was a really fun episode here, and, fun. Yeah. Got dark, but, who says the darkness can't be fun? So if you want to support us, if you want to help us do more episodes, get better guests, get a better quality podcast, support our show, consider leaving a small monthly donation at Patreon, patreon.com/psychedelics today. Or you can take one of our classes. There's free and paid classes at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And starting September 17, we boot up our next round of Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, which is just an amazing foundation for navigating your way through this really confusing landscape. Like if you're somebody who's about to go to grad school because you want to get into psychedelics, maybe do this first. Or as you're doing your initial courses, so you can kind of steer correct course a little bit. So check it out. It's all at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We've been getting rave reviews from clients and students, and just can't wait to teach it more. It's been really fun. I'm just shocked at how much fun it is to teach folks about this stuff, especially professional folks.
Mm-hmm. It's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Kyle. And Kyle and Joe signing off for Psychedelics Today. We'll see you next time.
Take care.